Hello and welcome back. This is the week 11 lecture. So now we are working on essay 3, the definition essay. So today I wanted to walk us through some of the basic steps of the writing process. I know we've done this before for the first two essays, but as we've noticed, every essay is different. We're trying out these different writing techniques. That means different procedures, slightly different goals. So that means our process will be a little bit different for each essay. So I thought it might be helpful to go through some of the process stuff today to get us moving on this particular essay. And I also wanted to talk a little bit more about the assignment itself, some of the requirements, our goals, and just some ways that we can get started. So all of this is, of course, in the week 11 module. Please take a look at my assignment instructions. Take a look at the overview, not just for this week, but the last couple of weeks, really going back to week 9. You can review everything that I posted since then. The weekly overviews, my lectures, all the stuff I posted in the modules, all of that's there. It should all be helpful as you're getting ready for this essay. So by now, I think we're all pretty comfortable and familiar with formal definitions. You know, what we look up, what we find when we go to the dictionary to look up the definition of an individual word. We started with that kind of work a couple of weeks ago, and we all seem to know what to do. And then last week, we sort of got a little bit bigger and more complex because we left individual words behind and we started talking more about more complex concepts, bigger things, bigger ideas or groups or categories that we can also define. And we can use a lot of the same strategies that we noticed in those formal definitions that we found in Merriam-Webster. So stuff like synonyms, antonyms, etymology, we can still use those strategies even when we start defining bigger things. So last week I talked about the importance of stipulative definitions and also extended definitions. And those are really going to be central to what we are doing throughout this week. In fact, you can really view Essay 3 as one big extended definition. Because like I was saying last week, when we are tackling these bigger concepts, these more complex terms or ideas, we often have to provide an extended definition. That just means we are writing more. We are providing more explanation, more examples. We have to write complete sentences. We might even have to write entire paragraphs in order to explain the things that we are defining. And also remember what a stipulative definition is. Not completely different than the formal definition, but remember we can always look up the formal definition. The stipulative definition really gets created by the author. It is a unique thing to you. It's when you stipulate or specify the particular way that you are going to use a word. So we've seen some examples of why this is necessary. We've noticed that a lot of words have a lot of different potential meanings. They have a lot of different potential usages, meaning they can get used in different ways by different people at different times. So when you're using words like that, you need to stipulate exactly what you mean when you use that word. So we mentioned pride as a really good example, a word that actually has different meanings and it can be used in a lot of different ways. So if you're going to talk about pride in an essay, you have to explain to your readers the way you're going to be using it. When I say pride, I mean this. We talked about the scientist writing the textbook, talking about the scientific concept of pressure. If we just wanted to find a formal definition for pressure, we could look it up and find it pretty easily. But we mentioned that a formal definition wouldn't be enough for a word like that because the word pressure has a particular meaning in a scientific context, and that's probably the way the scientist means it. But the word could mean something different. It could be used differently in a different context. So, like I was saying, just providing a formal definition wouldn't be enough. The scientist would need to really eliminate all the other potential meanings for his readers to make sure that the readers understood his stipulative definition for the word pressure. He's only using it in this sort of highly technical, highly literal scientific sense. But as we know, that's not the way a lot of us use the word pressure if we're talking about a sporting event or maybe how we felt before a test. So it's not a completely different definition, but there can be different uses, different meanings, slightly different meanings, so we have to stipulate what we mean. So make sure you're comfortable with those terms, because this week we can start with formal definitions. We can look those up for whatever term or concept or thing that we choose. But ultimately, what you're going to be writing will be extended stipulative definitions that must come from you. So let me just run very quickly through the things that we can choose from when it comes to what we are defining in Essay 3. So this is, again, a very different paper than Essay 2. We're not analyzing a text. We're not doing that type of work. So now you really have the freedom to choose your own subject or your own topic. But I am giving you some categories to choose from. So I'm just going to run through these very quickly here in lecture, but please read them in more detail. Read everything I'm saying about these categories in my assignment instructions. Just make sure that you're choosing something that is valid and allowed based on the guidelines of this assignment. So here are the categories you can choose from when you're looking for something to define. Category number 1, scientific or technological terms. I've mentioned before, these often make good candidates for extended definitions because these are terms that are often not familiar to a lot of regular people. They are unique or specific to certain areas of study or academic disciplines or occupations. So if you are more science inclined, if you like science and math more than stuff like English or history, you might want to go this route. You can grab a scientific term or concept, something that you've learned in a biology class or computer science or physics, and you can define that term and write about it in Essay 3. But I want to be clear. I don't just want you to recycle a bunch of stuff that you did for your science class or a bunch of stuff that you found in a science textbook. That's not what we're doing. You still have to create original content, but it's okay to use stuff that you've learned. We like learning. I like to see evidence of learning even outside the realm of English. So you can use stuff that you learned in biology class to help you talk about the term or the concept, but ultimately the synonyms, the antonyms, the etymology, all the strategies that you're using, that stuff has to come from you. But as long as that's fine with you, you can definitely choose a scientific term or concept. That's category number 1. Category number 2, new words or phrases. Okay, so these are words or phrases that might be slang or they might be jargon. I think I've mentioned jargon before. That just means specialized language that's unique to a particular field or area of study. So there's some overlap here between category 1 and potentially category 2. But you could also focus more on slang, colloquial expressions that perhaps have not entered into standard usage, meaning you couldn't find them in a dictionary, or at least not Merriam-Webster. You might be able to find them in an urban dictionary or some other type of resource, but these are relatively new examples of language. Stuff that hasn't completely caught on yet, but maybe it's language that's used by a particular group, a particular age group. It might be regional. You guys probably know a lot of slang is regional. People use certain terminology or certain words in certain parts of the country. right? And then in other parts of the country, the usage might be a little bit different. The meaning of some of those words might be a little bit different. So there's a lot you can do with slang or any type of jargon. Those often demand explanation and extended definitions. So that's category number 2. Category number 3, I'm just calling a select few abstract concepts. So we mentioned how we often have to define abstract things. And that's where stipulative and extended definitions really come in handy, because it can be hard to find really reliable formal definitions for abstract concepts. Things that don't have a physical or material existence. They really just exist more as ideas. But they're also like values. They're really important ideas to individuals. They're important to our larger society and culture. So there's a lot you can do with these. But I really had to limit this category because there's so many different abstract concepts that we could talk about. I wanted to limit the number of choices because it can be overwhelming otherwise. So I'm just giving you 5 different abstract concepts that you can choose from in category 3. Humor, love, friendship, success, and morality. These are all big, really important concepts, but they are notoriously difficult to define. Everybody has their own stipulative definitions of those words. What friendship and morality mean to me might not be exactly the same as what they mean to you. That does not mean that one of us is wrong. That just means that we have different stipulative definitions. We use those words in slightly different ways to perhaps accomplish slightly different goals. So there's a lot of room to work with any of those 5 abstract concepts. So that's category number 3. Category number 4 will be groups of people. Now we have to be careful because we don't want to define people too much, and we don't want to group people together too much because everybody's an individual, as we know. Everybody's different. And if we're not careful, some of this categorization or grouping based on things that we can define in people, that can slide into the realm of stereotyping if we're not careful. So I have some rules here for category 4. If you're going to do groups of people, you can only do your definition based on the following 3 things. Generations or age groups, since we just saw an example of that with Gen Z last week in that piece I asked you to read. You can do it like that. You can also define based on occupation. Different jobs or lines of work that people are in. You can define them based on occupation. And then third, hobbies. You can define people in groups based on what we might consider like skill-based hobbies. Hunting, fishing, playing the trumpet. You can talk about the activity itself, and you can talk about the people that enjoy that activity. Skiing would be another one, right? You can talk about it as an activity, and you can talk about the people who do it. You can group them together. You can define them as a group based on some shared characteristics. They all like to ski. They all have some of the same gear. They go to some of the same places, right? You can do some definition work based on that. But we want to keep it limited to those options: generations, occupations, or skill-based hobbies. And then that brings us to our 5th and final category of choices, and that will be activities. Very general, but we saw another example of this last week with American football. We got an extended definition of American football that largely consisted of etymology. So you can do that. You can do any type of sport. Maybe not American football, since we've already seen that, but any other sport, musical stuff, or again, any skill-based hobbies like hunting, fishing, skiing, playing a musical instrument. And you really might want to do a combo of those last two categories if you're thinking about hobbies. You can talk about the activity itself, define the activity. What is it? How long has it been around? Do all of your definition strategies for the activity. And then you can also define the people who do that activity. What are skiers like? What are they like as a group? You can spend some time on that as well. So those are your choices. Choose wisely. Pick something that you think you can produce a 3 to 4 page essay about. Don't make a choice based on what seems easy because ultimately you need to generate a lot of original content. So let's talk a little bit more about how we can translate these basic definition strategies from the level of individual words to the level of these bigger terms and concepts. We've already seen examples of this, so we should kind of already know. But just remember, the strategies are all still in effect, even though most of us are going to go beyond individual words. If you're doing the new words or phrases, you might just have a word or you might have a short phrase. But for most of these other categories, you'll be choosing something that's more than just a word. But you can always start with a word, with a formal definition, like we were saying. But a lot of those strategies that we saw with formal definitions, they still need to show up in your paper regardless of what you choose. But you might have to translate them a little bit from the level of word to the level of concept. So starting with that basic explanation of what it means, yeah, you can lean on the formal definition for that, but you can also add to it. The strategies that I really want you to think about are the following: examples, synonyms, antonyms, and etymology. All of these travel really well. They translate really well from the word level to the concept level. So, examples. You need a lot of specific examples. And remember what an example is. It's a specific instance or a specific occurrence that represents something bigger. It represents a larger group or it represents a larger abstract concept. But the example is the specific event, the specific case that proves the larger point that you're trying to make about that larger idea. So obviously, we need examples for practically any type of academic writing, but we very much need it when we're defining. And you guys saw all the different examples that were provided in those dictionary definitions, those denotations, those formal definitions. We got a ton of examples. So when we were looking at my word, ephemeral, we got examples of things that were ephemeral, like mayflies and certain types of rivers. But then we also saw the word being used in complete sentences. So think about that. That might be helpful for the thing that you choose to define. You might want to use it in a sentence, even if it's a phrase, even if it's a term, even if it's a little bit bigger than just a single word. You might want to use it in a sentence so we can better understand it in context. And that will help your readers have a more complete understanding. All right, so we want lots of examples, individual examples, and then also examples in the form of sentences. Also, you can apply the synonym strategy very easily to bigger concepts. Now, you might not be dealing with just a list of synonyms like you saw in a formal definition, but you can still do that kind of comparison work. Remember, all a synonym is a word that means something similar or the same to the word that we're looking up. So you can use the same idea with something bigger. What are the things that are similar to your thing? What are the things that are the exact same, if applicable? But at the very least, you should be able to find things that are similar. You can do some comparing. You can talk about how those things measure up to your thing. And then you can also look at antonyms. That's what I mean by negation. So synonyms give us a bigger picture of what the thing is like. What is it similar to? What is it the same as? What does it have in common with those things? That helps us to understand in one direction, and then we can understand in the opposite direction by thinking about what the thing isn't. What is it not? What is the opposite of it? So again, with an individual word, we could just look at a list of antonyms. But for something bigger, a larger idea, we can continue with this comparison work. We already did what it's similar to, now let's do what it is different than. So we can compare and contrast, look for similarities, and look for things that are different. And that will give us a lot to do. That will give us a lot to talk about. We can build entire body paragraphs around looking for similar stuff and looking at stuff that's very different. That helps us to understand. That helps your readers to understand what you're trying to show us about this thing that you are defining. And remember, your larger goal is to explain what this thing is, how it works, how it functions, and perhaps why it's important. So all of these strategies are helping you to do that. So definitely use examples, use synonyms, use antonyms, and also use your own version of etymology. All of these phrases and terms and concepts, they all have histories. Now, the individual words have histories. So if you're thinking about love as an abstract concept, yes, you can spend some time on the level of the word. What is the history of the word? How long has that word existed in our language? How has the use of the word potentially changed over time? You can do all of that, but also be aware there's another level. There's a whole nother level of etymology that you can jump on because there's also the history of the concept. There's the history of the idea, and it might be a little different than just the history of the word. It's the same with a term, or like a scientific term that might include some familiar words and then other words that aren't familiar. So you can attack the individual words, but you can also think about the history, the origin, and any changes that have occurred to the overall phrase, because that phrase, the combination of the individual words, might be a little bit different than the words themselves. So there's lots of layers here. There's lots you can do when you're thinking about etymology, the history and the origins of whatever it is you're defining. And a big part of that history will be any changes that might have occurred to how we use or understand some of these words or larger concepts. So that's stuff that you're going to have to mostly look up, the etymology. You'll have to look that up. That's where a lot of your online research will come in. When it comes to those other strategies, like I said earlier, you should be able to provide those largely on your own. But the etymology, sure, you'll need some help on that. Consult some reliable websites. Merriam-Webster might be a good resource. You can use that again. But that's also something you can build a body paragraph around. So those are the strategies that I want to see. Examples, synonyms, antonyms, etymology, and whatever else is applicable. So we noticed in our formal definitions that there was usually like a pronunciation guide telling us how to pronounce a word. If that applies to your chosen topic, give us that. If we need to know how to pronounce it, you can tell us that. And also your way of explaining just the basic meaning of your chosen topic, that's really up to you, how you're going to arrange that, organize that, word that. We know that the explanation for a single word might just be a sentence or two. If there's multiple meanings, we might get 5 or 6 sentences. But for a more complex concept, your explanation might simply have to be longer, more detailed, and you have to figure out what you need to make it work. You might need examples. You might need to incorporate some of those strategies directly into that basic explanation. Or those strategies can supplement the explanation. They can serve as elaboration to help your explanation sustain itself throughout the entire paper. But you have to make some of these decisions about how you're going to explain, how you're going to use the strategies, and how you're going to organize this paper. So that's why pre-writing and outlining will be so important. This paper will require a lot of attention on that organizational level. So let's wrap up just by talking a little bit more about our writing process, the steps that we need to take, and how we can sort of use this week in the most productive way possible. So as we know, we're devoting the entire week to writing the paper. So you don't have a reading assignment. You don't have a discussion post. All you are concerned about this week for this class is Essay 3. So let's start with our pre-writing activities. At the beginning of the week, you need to be generating some ideas, thinking about your purpose, thinking about your audience, and getting started. So remember, pre-writing refers to all the stuff you do before you sit down to actually write your rough draft. So most of your pre-writing should get done maybe Monday, Tuesday, into the middle of the week. And you might want to start simply by looking up the formal definition of your chosen subject or topic. You'll probably be able to find one, but like I was saying, you might have to look around a little bit. And then I would recommend some basic brainstorming. Just do a little bit of free writing to get some ideas down on paper. Either before or after looking up the formal definition, go ahead and write down everything that you already know and already think about your chosen topic, whatever it is you chose to define. What do you already know about it? Maybe you have some experience. Maybe you already have some useful knowledge. You can also just write down some opinions, what you think, how it makes you feel, why you think it's important. Why are you defining it? Why have you chosen it? Why do you think it's an important thing for people to understand? You can start jotting some stuff down about that. And like I've told you before, always think about audience and purpose when you first get started on an essay assignment. Your purpose here is pretty clear. You're explaining this concept or term that you are defining. You're giving us a definition, your stipulative definition, your extended definition, but you're also just providing a general explanation so we understand it. That's your goal. It's pretty similar to your goal with Essay 2, but you're going about it in a very different way. You're not analyzing a text. Now you're defining a thing. But you're ultimately still ending up with a clear, comprehensive explanation that your readers will be able to do something with. So think about your audience. It could be your peers. It could be, obviously, your classmates. I'm part of the audience. But think about what we expect. Think about what we want. Clarity, obviously. We want things to make sense. We want things to flow. But also, remember that we are a general audience. So again, if you're dealing with jargon, with scientific terms, slang that is only used by young people in a certain part of the country, you can't assume that your audiences know very much about those things. But also remember that we're pretty smart, and you don't need to treat us like children. We do know basic things, but we don't know very much, most likely, about the thing that you're defining. Or at least we don't know the particular way that you're going to be using it. So focus a lot of your attention on explaining your stipulative definition, explaining the stuff that isn't obvious, the stuff that isn't general common knowledge. Don't waste time explaining things that you can imagine most adult humans already know. Focus on what we probably don't know. All right, so always keep your audience in mind and always start with a clear sense of what your purpose is. And then you can generate ideas, look up the formal definition. You can go ahead and look up the etymology as well if it's not included in that formal definition. Get some of that basic info that you know you're going to need later. And once you've generated some ideas, the last part of pre-writing is to outline and then make your writing schedule for the rest of the week. So outlining is very important. That is the plan for your paper. It is the blueprint. And that's what you're going to follow, more or less, when you sit down to actually write. Now, you don't have to be married to everything in the outline, but it gives you a general idea of what you're doing and the order that you're going to do it in. Always take a look at my sample outline. I post one for every major essay. You don't have to follow it verbatim, but if nothing else, use it as a checklist. I'm telling you what you need to do in each paragraph that you include in the paper. Your intro paragraph, your body paragraphs, and then eventually your conclusion. So at some point, you want to go and look at my outline to make sure that you're actually including the stuff that you need in those paragraphs. But that really is the level that your outline should be working on. It is a plan for individual paragraphs. What am I doing in the intro? What am I doing in my first body paragraph? Am I talking about synonyms? Am I getting into etymology? What am I doing? What am I doing in the second body? What am I doing in the third body? I might have a fourth body. I might have a fifth body. I need to have a plan for each one. I always recommend having topic sentences in your outline, kind of announcing what that particular paragraph is going to be about. That's especially helpful in your bodies. It's as much for you as it is for your readers. Those topic sentences might not appear in the exact same form in your actual draft, but it's good to have them in your outline so they can guide you. So you can remember, oh yeah, in my second body paragraph, I was going to do the comparing and contrasting or whatever. It's for you. It's keeping you organized. It's keeping you focused so you make sure you do everything you need to do in the paper. So by the middle of the week, you should have an outline. And also create a schedule for the rest of the week. You know your schedules, I don't. You know when you have free time. So try to create 2 blocks of time for yourself between, say, Wednesday and Sunday. If you're done pre-writing and you have an outline by Wednesday, try to create 2 more blocks, a writing block and then a post-writing block. And obviously the writing block needs to be the biggest one. That's when you're going to sit down and actually hammer out your rough draft. So that might take a day. That might take 3 to 4 hours. I don't know. That's a decision you guys have to make individually based on how much time you have. If you have a free day, maybe spend most of that day writing. If you never have more than an hour free on any given day, then the writing might have to get broken up into 3 small sessions. I can write for 1 hour on Wednesday, 1 hour for Thursday, and 1 hour on Friday. Maybe it goes like that. But try to figure it out. And then leave yourself a final block of time at the very end of the week, even if that means Sunday, even if it means Sunday night, for post-writing, revising, and editing. So let's just wrap up by talking about the writing and then the post-writing. So, like I've said before, when you're writing your rough draft, and remember, that first version of the paper that you create, it will be a rough draft. It is not a final draft. It's not ready to be submitted. But when you're writing the rough draft, you should really be focused on completion. Don't worry too much if it sounds great, if it looks great. If you're on schedule, you'll have time to make corrections and clean stuff up later when you're post-writing. So when you're writing that rough draft, just write freely and focus on completion. Try to get to my length requirement so you have all of the content that you need. And then, if possible, take a break. It would be great to finish your rough draft by Thursday or Friday. If it's finished by 5 p.m. on Friday, you can send it to me in an email. Don't upload it to Canvas, but attach it to an email, send it to me, and I can provide feedback. But if you want to do that, I need to have your rough draft by 5 p.m. on Friday. But even if you don't make that deadline, if you're finishing up the rough draft by Saturday or even Sunday morning, that's pretty good because you still have some time left for post writing. But it's always productive to get away from your paper for at least a couple of hours. Even if you can't get away for an entire day, take at least a small break. Do something else. And then come back for the final steps, which are the post-writing steps, revising and editing. Remember, these are slightly different activities. Revising just means you are making general improvements to your paper. That's not the same as editing. Editing's more focused on just correcting mistakes. Now, there is some overlap. When you read back through your draft and you're revising, you might notice some mistakes that you need to correct. But often what you're doing with revising isn't so much corrections, it's more just improvements on the sentence level and on the paragraph level. So you might notice that some of your sentences just aren't very clear. They might not sound good. Maybe you can't identify an actual mistake like a punctuation or grammatical issue. It just doesn't sound good. It's not clear. You can make it better. Revising is the time to do that. In other cases, you might want to combine sentences. You might find a sentence that's too long. It's confusing. So you can break it up. And then once you've done that work on the sentence level, making sure you feel good about your individual sentences, you can do that same kind of revising work on the paragraph level. How are your paragraphs? Are the paragraphs working well? In some cases, you're going to need to add a little bit to your paragraphs. Are the paragraphs accomplishing clear goals? Again, maybe you want to look for topic sentences. Is it clear what you are doing in each body paragraph? You can always go back to my outline. Double check. Do you have everything? But also just look at development. Generally, look at the development of your individual body paragraphs. Some are going to be a little bit too short. Not enough detail. Not enough examples. You might want to add a little bit to them. In other cases, your paragraphs might be too long. You have good content, but the paragraph itself is just too long. It becomes difficult to read. So find a logical place to make a paragraph break. So now, instead of one super long paragraph, you have two moderately length paragraphs. That's what revision's all about. You might even rearrange some paragraphs. Sometimes you're adding a little bit, sometimes you're cutting a little bit, but you're just making those improvements. And then once you've done that, it might be 11 o'clock on Sunday night, but if you still have a little bit of time, do a final round of proofreading, go back through your draft, and this time you're editing. You're just looking for mistakes, typos, missing punctuation, formatting issues, anything that needs to be corrected, and you're making those corrections before submitting the final draft. So I was going to have a final sentence structure editing lesson built into our lecture today, but I don't think so. I saw some real improvement on the sentence level with Essay 2. There were some other issues that we might have to address on an individual basis, but for some of us, but a lot of those sentence level mistakes that I was seeing on Essay 1 were a little bit less common. They were showing up a little bit less often on Essay 2. But just remember to pay attention to your sentence construction. How are you building your sentences? We know that we like to write complex sentences. A lot of our sentences have multiple ideas, multiple parts, multiple clauses, different phrases. So when we have all of these different moving parts in a sentence, we have to pay attention to punctuation. We might need commas. We might need dashes. We might need semicolons. We might need the combination of a comma and a coordinating conjunction. But just think about it. Often you guys can make those sentences work without being grammar whizzes, without knowing all the grammar rules. It's just about recognizing what sentences need punctuation. What sentences need that connecting tissue between independent clauses or between different ideas? Make your decisions based on what you're seeing. And you might catch some fragments. You might catch some run-ons. Those are usually easy to fix, but only if you take the time to revise and edit. So good luck. Make your choices. Let me know if you have any questions about the assignment. And again, if you want me to look at a rough draft, send that to me in an email by Friday at 5. If you're struggling with the assignment, if you need an extension, reach out, let me know. And if you have questions, let me know, and I'm happy to talk. Otherwise, good luck, and I will see you next week.